we go into our first topic here, which is a lot of exciting games in Week 9 as we head into we had the penultimate week in the regular season, and kind of just looking at where we were going into. Uh, you and I had some very close matchups that we were at this week. I mean, this whole thing with the out at Tom Benson, where McKinley and Perry were going down to it. New Philadelphia also went down to it with Wes Holmes. I mean, we were kind of wondering if Perry might have an ounce of competitiveness against McKinley this week, and the Glen Oak, excuse me, and then Glen Oak somehow put together this final drive again in this low scoring game. Mitch, I mean, how did the Eagles do it?
Trap games are what we use to describe games before the big one, right? We hear it all the time in any sport. I don't know if I want to call it a trap game because I want to give Glen Oak credit, but Mitch, for the first time all year, a team was able to hold McKinley in check, and it was the Glen Oak Golden Eagles. 7-3 your final. Glen Oak scores with under a minute to go. Final drive of the game, touchdown pass, and you wonder if McKinley was partially caught looking ahead because of the game coming up this week, Saturday afternoon at Tom Benson against Massillon. And we know how big of a deal that game is. We know it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, high school rivalry football game in the country. But Glen Oak played perhaps the best football game they've played all year. And it's hard to describe, but seeing Glen Oak go on a methodical, it was an 18-play drive that ends up with them scoring a touchdown with under a minute to go to take a 7-3 lead on McKinley. And then all you have to do is just trust your defense, who Mitch, for the most part, that entire game was dominant. I mean, they completely took away anything McKinley was trying to do. And there's no style points. All you had to do is win. And Glen Oak found a way to win. And now McKinley, which with a win this past Friday was looking for an outright Federal League title, is now potentially looking to share it again for the second consecutive year with the same exact team in the Lake Blue Streaks. And that's if Lake can win their Week 10 matchup against Green in rivalry week. But there's 7 teams in the Fed. Somebody's always off every week. This week it's McKinley. So now McKinley has to become Green Bulldog fans and hope they beat Lake for an outright Fed title, or McKinley's just going to have to be okay with being co-Federal League champs with Lake again for the second consecutive year. So I'm excited to see what happens in Week 10. But all in all, you have to give Glen Oak all the credit, because what they did to go into Tom Benson and defeat McKinley, a very good McKinley team, may I add. You and I have got to see them in person twice this year. It was nothing short of remarkable. Not like I want to say it was like a miracle, but I mean, just the way they won, right? I think it'd be a little bit different if we're talking about, hey, Glen Oak won 28-25, or something like that. But no, 7-3 to hold that high-powered McKinley offense in check. Hats off to head coach Scott Garcia and the entire Glen Oak Golden Eagles football team, because that was a huge win for the team and that school. And they got to play spoiler. And sometimes at this point in the season, if you can play spoiler, that's all that matters. And Glen Oak ended up playing spoiler with a 7-3 win in Week 9.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the Massillon McKinley game coming up this week, and the Tigers just took down Warren Harding 48-14. So it seems like there's very few teams that can stop this Massillon squad going into the final week of the season. And this defense, who's been giving up less than 10 points a game on average this year, has really been matching up with the offense this year. The offense can just score points at will. It's really impressive to see what they've been doing so far this year. The top team in Division II. Your school, Jackson, also got a victory this week over Canton Central to stifle the losing streak there. So, I mean, that's a good matchup in the Federal League there as well. You also had a matchup between Green and Hoover, in which the Bulldogs outlasted the Vikings 41-34, which is a great win for Green there. A couple of other matchups. You also had an EBC championship that was won, or at least part of an EBC championship for West Branch with their victory over Carrollton, their 8th straight win and their 20th conference win in a row in the victory it was 49-14 as Bo Alazis threw 4 touchdown passes for West Branch. A couple other ones here as well. You had Fairless victorious this week in week 9. South won again. Canton South is 9-0 as they head into their a big showdown this week against Northwest. Malvern also won a victory. They've essentially gotten the IVC North title in check. Garaway also winning as well, and Garaway kind of having a bit of a interesting situation here in the last couple of weeks. And then I want to talk about this New Philly game that I was at on Friday night. New Philadelphia had arguably its top defensive performance of the season against a West Holmes squad that came in, not as strong as some years past, but still a team that could dominate in putting up points. I mean, they've had point totals of around 56 and 59 and 48 in the last couple of weeks, which is insane. They got held 20-6 in a victory over Ashland the week before this game. It was 9-8 in this one. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, a team scored a 2-point conversion. Maybe a team kicked 3 field goals. Maybe a team did this. No, that's not what happened at all. The Knights went up 3-0 right before halftime in this matchup that just kind of got stuck between the middle of the field between these two teams. And then the Quakers got on the board in the fourth quarter with a drive that finally got them into the red zone, where Keaton Fossil, who just played a tremendous game, was able to rush into the end zone for the Quakers' first and would-be only touchdown. Now, Fossil ran for 94 yards on 19 carries to lead the Quakers alongside Edney Richardson, who surpassed the 1,000-yard rushing mark for the season with 59 yards on 16 carries for the Quakers on Friday. That being said, the two teams went back and forth for a couple of matchups, and then the Knights got the ball back with I think it was around 5 or so minutes left in the game. They went on a 17-play final drive that included a couple of fourth downs, a couple of huge penalties. Speaking of penalties, by the way, West Holmes had 20 penalties in that game. 20 penalties, and most of them were on false starts or illegal formations. It was like the offense would get to the line, and then you just hear all of a sudden the whistles blow and the flags come out, and somebody moved illegally. I mean, West Holmes, this offense that had been running wild throughout the first couple of weeks of the season, had to have been frustrated the whole night. But I should also shout out some of the Quaker defensive performances as well. Zach Rothrock was the Clars XL player of the game. He punched a ball out of quarterback Morgan Smith's hand right before he got into the end zone as the ball went out for a touchback. And Rothrock also had one of 2 Smith interceptions thrown in the third quarter that made people think, wow, maybe the Quakers can actually pull this one out against a team that dropped 60 points on them last season. So the Quakers did what they had to do. But Smith, who has put up some video game numbers this season, had 360 yards of total offense in this game, 207 yards throwing, 153 rushing, 17 of 28. 10 of those passes were thrown to Kyle Maltrich, a 6'3" wide receiver who catches very aggressive, especially against that New Philly secondary. But on the last play, a play in which, by the way, was moved back from the 5-yard line. It was supposed to be the final play of the game, 5-yard line. The last false start penalty moved it back to the 10-yard line, so it was first and goal from the 10. And Smith found Nate Fair in the back left corner of the end zone, just wide open as he rolled out to the left. And West Holmes scored as time expired, made it 9-8. And they boosted their record to 7-2 on the season, 5-1 in the OCC. And their playoff standing is pretty set. They're in the top 3 in their respective region. New Philadelphia at last check was around the mid-teens. So they're going to need some work in order for them to get into the playoffs, especially with a game this week, a rivalry game at Dover against the Crimson Tornadoes, which I will be at. Big Time Sports will be out there as well. You guys can check bigtimesportsohio.com/schedule for more information on where we'll be, when we'll be, and for all of our coverage leading up to that game. So it's going to be an interesting time here in the next rivalry week. We got rivalries in Tuscarawas, rivalries in Stark, and throughout the rest of the state here as well, which I'm sure we'll get to later on.